Every payday brings the same message. Put in more hours, take home more cash. That's supposedly the entire formula. So you grab another Saturday shift, third one in a row this month, 40 extra hours logged, still the same $19.50 hourly rate. Still the same worn-out legs come Sunday evening. What nobody tells you is there's a different rule at play, one that has nothing to do with weekend shifts. It's sitting right there in your banking app this very moment, untouched, growing while you're asleep, quietly worth more than the entire shift you just clocked. Call it the wealth shift. By 10 in the morning, you're back at your cubicle in the insurance building, headset dangling around your neck, when Kayla from the claims department turns her screen toward you to show off her new lease. A 2026 BMW X3, $549 monthly, 36-month term, 0 down. I just felt like I earned it, she tells you, and you nod because you understand exactly what saying that costs and what actually believing it costs even more. Your salary is $58,000 a year. So is hers. Same hours logged, same break room coffee, same 3% raise notice every January. Yet somehow this one choice, a vehicle, a monthly figure, a signature on paperwork, makes it seem like she's pulled ahead. For a moment under those fluorescent lights, it genuinely feels true. Then you're back at your desk, pulling up that same banking app from the grocery store line earlier, except this time you don't shut it after checking your balance. You keep scrolling. Savings, $340. The retirement account you opened when you started 18 months back, with a 4% company match, currently at $2,100. Nothing else invested anywhere. No Roth, no brokerage, nothing. You add it up mentally, get it wrong, try again on your phone calculator, and land somewhere just under $2,500. That figure hits differently than your paycheck does. Your paycheck is money passing through. It arrives, it leaves, it covers rent, the cereal you finally bought. This number is different. It's what remains once everything else has taken its cut. It's what you genuinely hold on to. You think about Kayla's lease again, except the math looks different now. That X3 costs $549 every month for an asset losing value with every mile she puts on it. Your retirement contribution is $180 a month, automatic, barely noticed, and it's the only payment you make that leaves you wealthier instead of poorer. Nobody flips their monitor around to flaunt a retirement balance. Nobody posts a screenshot of their Roth IRA, but one of these figures compounds upward while the other loses value the moment it drives off the lot. This year's contribution ceiling on your 401k sits at $24,500. You're miles from that ceiling. Not on this income, not currently. But digging through the plan's fine print that afternoon, you learned something else. The combined cap between your contributions and the employer match tops out at $72,000. You're not maxing anything out. You're barely showing up to the game. Yet for the first time, simply showing up feels like the whole point, and that lease payment starts to look like a costume. That evening, driving your 2019 Honda Civic LX home, 91,000 miles, a check engine light you've ignored since March. You don't feel like you're losing anymore. You feel like you finally understand what's actually being measured. It was never about the car sitting in the lot. It was never about the number that lands in your account and vanishes by the 15th. It's the number that remains, which is precisely the issue, because right now most of what remains isn't growing at all. Something else is quietly eating it, something carrying its own due date and its own interest rate, something you haven't opened in 3 weeks. The statement sits unread in your inbox, its subject line fading gray with age. You finally open it Sunday night on the couch, laptop balanced on your knees, a bowl of cold leftover pasta beside you. Chase Freedom Unlimited. Balance, $6,380. APR, 23.99%. Minimum payment, $159. You know exactly how this balance formed, the same way most people's does. A security deposit you couldn't cover in cash, an emergency root canal back in February, a plane ticket home for your cousin's wedding in Scottsdale that went on the card because skipping it wasn't really an option. None of it felt careless in the moment. It felt like simply living your life. Your neighbor down the hall, Devin, a paralegal working nights, Once mentioned he just pays the minimum and doesn't overthink it. It's basically nothing, like $150 a month, he said, leaning against the mailboxes. You nodded along. Tonight, on your couch, you finally do the math he never bothered doing. At 23.99% interest, paying only that $159 minimum, clearing $6,380 takes over 9 years. You'll hand over more than $6,900 in interest alone, more than the original debt, just for the convenience of not thinking about it sooner. Suddenly the number stops feeling abstract. It feels like a second rent bill you signed up for without reading the fine print. You think back to that $180 monthly retirement contribution, quietly compounding in your favor in the background. This card runs the identical mechanism in reverse. Same daily compounding, except instead of constructing something, it's tearing something down one billing cycle at a time. Devon's "it's basically nothing" is actually a 9-year sentence carrying a $6,900 penalty. You open a second browser tab, not to transfer the balance since you don't qualify for a 0% intro card yet, but to build a real plan instead of an imagined one. $6,380 split across 18 months comes to $354 monthly. That's not painless. That means canceling your streaming workout app. That means packing lunch instead of ordering delivery. That means turning down Devon's sister's wedding, this one in Napa, which you can already feel yourself dreading having to decline. But 18 months at that pace costs roughly $1,350 in interest instead of $6,900. You scribble the figure on a sticky note and press it to your laptop lid, not as inspiration, just as a fact. You don't want to repeat the mistake of those 3 ignored weeks. There's a version of tonight where you close the laptop, finish the cold pasta, and let the minimum payment keep doing what it's always done. Nobody would notice. The card would keep swiping fine at checkout. The balance would just keep climbing somewhere you've trained yourself not to check. Instead, you set up an autopay of $354 starting Friday, watch the confirmation load, and feel something closer to dread than relief. Because $354 leaving an already stretched paycheck is real money, which is exactly why cash you haven't saved yet is about to matter more than it ever has. 3 weeks into that $354 autopay, your car answers a question you never asked. The check engine light on the Civic stops flickering and just stays lit. Solid. 2 days later, it won't start in the office parking lot at 5:47 in the evening. The lot already half empty, the sky turning that flat gray-orange it gets in late October. The tow driver, a guy named Ray who's done this 11 years and mentions it unprompted, drops the Civic at a shop off Route 9. The next morning's diagnosis: a dead alternator plus a serpentine belt already on its last legs. $612 in parts and labor, due before they'll release the vehicle. You have $340 saved. You had $340 saved 3 weeks ago too, before you started funneling every spare dollar toward the chase balance. And you haven't added anything since because the card felt more pressing. Sitting in the shop's waiting area, a coffee machine sputtering in the corner, you finally run the math you should have run a month earlier. $612 minus your $340 leaves a $272 gap. The nearest source for that gap is the credit card, the very card you've spent 3 weeks shrinking. This is the moment it all stops being theoretical. Every conversation about interest rates and compounding was accurate, but it was also hypothetical, a number you could close your laptop on. This is a car that won't start and a shop demanding payment before 5. This is the line between an inconvenience and an emergency, and the only thing separating those two is whether the money already exists somewhere with your name attached. You put the $272 on the card. It's the only option in the room. And watching that charge process, you finally understand, not from some article, not from anything Ray or anyone said, but from the actual weight in your chest. Why the 6 months of expenses advice isn't really a savings target. It's a wall. It's supposed to stand between you and exactly this swipe, and yours hasn't been built yet. Your coworker Bianca, 2 desks over, once mentioned she keeps 4 months of expenses parked in a Marcus by Goldman Sachs savings account, untouched. Boring on purpose, she'd called it. You'd nodded politely at the time, filing it away under things responsible people do. Now, walking out of the shop with a repaired alternator and a heavier balance on a card you just started paying down, it doesn't sound boring anymore. It sounds like the difference between a rough Tuesday and a rough year. Your monthly costs, rent, insurance, groceries, the unavoidable minimums, land around $2,100. 6 months of that is $12,600, a number so far from your current $340 that it feels impossible. For a second, it does feel impossible, but you're not trying to build the whole thing this week. You're building the first $100 of it this Friday, the same way that $354 autopay became real by simply picking a number and a date. You open a separate account that same night, before you can talk yourself out of it and move over $50 you don't technically have room for. It isn't the wall yet, it's the first brick. Underneath all of this sits a quieter question. Not what happens when the car breaks down, but what your time is actually worth when nothing breaks at all. That question doesn't wait long for an answer. Monday morning, your manager, Todd, pulls you into the conference room with the broken blinds and tells you, almost apologetically, that this year's raise is 3%. Same number as last year, same as the year before. $58,000 becomes $59,740. You've done the math before you're even back at your seat. After taxes, that's roughly $40 extra a month, less than what you just started sending toward the alternator fund. You sit there staring at your two company monitors, one noticeably dimmer than the other, and something Bianca mentioned weeks back comes back to you. She'd said, almost offhand, that she'd picked up remote freelance claims documentation for a small firm in Tampa, a few hours weekly using the exact same software skills from her day job. It's not extra work, she'd said. It's the same work, just not capped by whatever Todd decides I'm worth. That distinction lingers longer than the raise did. Your salary comes with a built-in ceiling, a percentage Todd doesn't even set himself, decided somewhere above him in a budget meeting you'll never attend. But the actual skill, reading a claims file quickly, writing it up cleanly, catching what gets overlooked, that skill has no ceiling Todd controls. Its only limit is the one you place on it yourself. That night you open your laptop, not to check your balance this time, but to browse freelance platforms. Upwork first, then a claim-specific staffing site Bianca brings up again over lunch Wednesday. You build a profile in an hour, list the 2 software systems you know cold, and forget about it for 4 days, until a message arrives from a small, independent adjusting firm in Ohio. 15 files, $22 an hour, remote, evenings only. It's not much. 15 files at $22 comes to a few $100s over 2 weeks, done in the 90 minutes after dinner you used to spend scrolling. But it's income with no ceiling attached. No Todd, no fixed 3%. Working those freelance files, you notice something unexpected. How much faster you move than at your actual desk job, simply because nobody's watching the clock, because the only thing that matters is getting the file done well. You also notice your kitchen table laptop screen isn't cutting it. The freelance software runs sluggish, and you're squinting at 10 at night comparing 2 versions of the same document. You look at a refurbished 27-inch Dell Ultra Sharp monitor, $189, and hesitate for 2 days before buying it. It's not a splurge. It's not the BMW in the parking lot. It's what makes the extra income sustainable without wrecking your eyesight by Thursday. By month's end, between the raise and the freelance work, you've added roughly $340 to what used to be just your salary. And for the first time, that second number came from something Todd never touched. It came from a skill you already had, pointed somewhere your job title couldn't reach. Which raises an entirely different question, whether the safest place for that extra money is even the safe option at all. 6 weeks later, the Ohio freelance gig turns into something bigger. Not more files, but an actual full-time offer. A startup called Fieldstone Claims. 4 employees, no office, building software to automate exactly the work you've been doing manually for 2 years. The founder, a former adjuster named Renata, offers you $52,000, a pay cut, plus 0.75% equity vesting over 4 years. You bring the offer to Bianca at lunch, sliding your phone across like it might bite. She reads it twice. That's a pay cut, she says, which you already knew, the same thought that's kept you up since Tuesday. Renata's own former boss left a stable adjusting job 6 years ago for something almost identical, and last spring that company sold. Renata mentioned once, casually, that her old boss walked away with just under $4 million and bought a place on Lake Travis outside Austin, a 4-bedroom on the water listed around $2.1 million, the kind of listing you scroll past on Zillow at midnight without meaning to. You don't know if Fieldstone becomes that. Nobody knows. That's the whole point. Here's what rarely gets explained clearly. An asymmetric bet isn't a blind guess dressed up in confidence. It's a trade where you can name your downside ahead of time. Here, the downside is $7,740 a year in lost salary. The exact gap between your current pay and Renata's offer times 4 years, if it never vests into anything real. That's survivable. It's not the full weight of Kayla's lease. It's not the alternator emergency. It's a bruise, not a fracture. The upside, meanwhile, has no ceiling because equity doesn't behave like a paycheck. Your 3% raise from Todd was capped the second it was announced. Renata's 0.75% isn't capped by anything except how large Fieldstone eventually becomes. And if it comes anywhere close to what her old company achieved, 0.75% of $4 million is money that changes which decade you retire in. That night you run a different kind of calculation, one you've never done before. 5 times your annual expenses invested is the point where compounding alone can carry you the rest of the way without another dollar added. Bianca once called this coasting, half joking, the way people joke about things they genuinely want. At $2,100 in monthly expenses, that number is $126,000. You're nowhere close. But for the first time, you can picture a path where equity, not another 3% raise, is what closes that gap in years rather than decades. You think about the Civic, the alternator, the $354 still leaving your account monthly for the Chase card. None of that disappears if you take this job, and the bet doesn't erase the ground beneath you. It just changes what you're standing on it for. You type the acceptance email to Renata at 11:40 p.m., read it twice, and hit send before you can talk yourself back into playing it safe. Not because you're certain, but because you finally understand certainty was never actually on the table. Not even in the safe job. Todd's ceiling was never guaranteed to hold for the next decade. It just felt that way because nothing had tested it yet. The equity vests over 4 years. Nothing changes tomorrow. Nothing changes next month. What you've actually built, walking away from that decision, is smaller and stranger than a payout. It's exposure to an outcome that doesn't exist yet, in exchange for putting your name on something that might. Which only means something if the version of you who made that choice is still standing when it finally pays off. 5 months into Fieldstone, you're riding shotgun in Renata's Subaru Outback Wilderness, driving back from a client meeting in Columbus, when her phone lights up on the dash. Her father. She lets it go to voicemail, then exhales in a way that says more than the call would have. He's turning 70 in March, she says, not really to you. I still haven't asked him where the will is. You don't respond right away because you're thinking about your own father. 68? Still working? Still the type who changes his own oil and won't discuss money with anyone. Somewhere along Route 33, fields rolling past, you realize you don't know where his will is either. You don't even know if one exists. That night you open your laptop, and instead of the freelance dashboard or the auto-pay screen, you're browsing term life insurance quotes. Not because anything happened, but because for the first time something depends on you being around. Your mother, still 5 years from her own retirement, still quietly counting on you not needing help from her. And maybe one day being able to help her instead. Between Fieldstone and the remaining freelance work, you're earning around $60,000. The figure every insurance site repeats is 10 to 12 times your income, putting you somewhere between $600,000 and $720,000 in coverage. A 20-year term policy through Haven Life, healthy non-smoker rate, runs about $28 a month. Less than that Dell monitor cost. You sit with that contrast a moment. $28 a month is the price of ensuring a bad day doesn't turn into a second tragedy for someone who loves you. You think of Renata's father and the will nobody's asked about, and open another tab. A basic will through a service like Trust and Will costs under $200. One afternoon answering questions about who inherits what, who you'd trust with decisions if you couldn't make your own. You don't have much yet. No house, no waterfront property on Lake Travis, none of that. But you have a retirement account, a growing brokerage balance from Fieldstone equity slowly vesting, and a Civic finally running clean. Somebody should know what happens to all of it. The harder conversation is the one Renata almost had on the highway. You call your dad that Sunday, not directly about money, circling it the way these talks always start. He deflects twice. The third time you just ask outright, "Where's the paperwork? Is there a will? Who do we contact if something happens?" He goes quiet a beat, then tells you it's in the fireproof box in the garage. Something in his voice sounds relieved you finally asked, before he had to bring it up himself. You hang up and sit at your kitchen table, the Dell monitor dark, the city doing whatever it does outside on a Sunday night. None of this felt like winning. It felt like maintenance, the unglamorous kind, the kind nobody screenshots. But maintenance is what keeps a fortress standing once it's built. And somewhere between the alternator, the equity, and that fireproof box in your father's garage, you stopped being the version of yourself standing in the cereal aisle. Not because the numbers got any easier, but because you finally know which ones are worth carrying. These days, you still check your accounts most mornings, but you're not bracing for it anymore. The dread used to hit before the app even finished loading. Now it's just habit, the way Renata checks the weather before a drive. Tonight, making dinner, the memory of that fireproof box conversation surfaces unprompted, and you notice it the way you'd notice a familiar stranger's face. Not urgent, just present, understood a little more each time it returns. The Civic still ticks faintly on cold mornings. The equity still hasn't fully vested. Tuesday will still demand something Monday didn't finish paying for. But you're no longer doing the math just to survive it. You're doing it because you finally know exactly what you're protecting.